and welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Expert, hosted by my co-host, Teresa Ream, and myself, Patty Farmer. We're looking forward to sharing today's expert with you and encourage you to connect with her after the show and to take action in your business on the expertise she's going to share. So we would also like to thank our sponsor, the Professional Women's Network of Monterey, and you can find out more about them at www.pwnmonterey.org. And I'm going to turn it over now to Teresa, who is going to introduce our guest and tell you a little bit more about her.
Oh, great. Thanks, Patty. Today we will be talking about managing your stress with Isabelle Tierney. Isabelle, MALMFT, is a stress management specialist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and international teacher. Isabelle holds 2 master's degrees, one in international relations and communications from Boston University, and one in child development from Tufts University. After conquering burnout, Isabelle launched her company, Choice Point, which is dedicated to improving people's lives with technologies that relieve stress and enhance mental health and well-being. One of its divisions, Stress Reset, serves businesses and corporations through proprietary programs and an app. Another division, the Feel Good Life, helps consumers live with more ease, connection, and joy. She's presented at numerous mental health conferences, YPO events, universities, podcasts, and retreats all over the world on topics such as stress, conscious leadership, relational intelligence, and body image. Isabelle lives in Montana to be close to her 2 grandchildren and speaks 3 languages, which is English, French, and Spanish. Welcome, Isabelle.
Thank you so much. It's always so interesting to listen to bio. It's like it puts my whole life into a few paragraphs. So it's always strange to hear it.
I always think that too.
Right?
But I really love this topic because I really feel that whether it's in your own life, right? Because business and our life, right? That whole constant balance thing. But I also feel like in our business too, that a lot of times as an entrepreneur and a business owner, we have stress, right? And sometimes it's in little ways, sometimes it shows up in big ways, right? And balancing that too, right? It's kind of like balancing stress is like balancing sleep. And we know that lack of sleep actually is a cause of stress as well too. But I really kind of want to dive into that because I think it is a powerful topic and something that entrepreneurs and business owners struggle with every single day. So one of the things I want to know is for somebody who specializes in this, that this is your expertise, what's the one thing that differentiates you from other people in your industry?
I love that question. I love the concept of work-life balance. I would love to have a life that doesn't have stress. I have found that it's just not possible. And what I have found is that the biggest problem we have with stress is not necessarily that we have stress, it's our relationship to it, right? We wish we didn't have stress, or we don't even realize we have stress. And then we get into conflict with people, or we overeat, or we drink. Like stress is this thing that we don't really know how to relate with well. And so in the methodology that I teach people really to recognize when they're in the stress response. And then I have these 3 steps to help you reduce the stress and bring you back into what I call the thrive response, regardless of the external circumstances. So it's like the external circumstances changing become a bonus rather than a demand, because you become so skilled at managing your own nervous system and your own internal state that it doesn't matter what life throws at you. You are going to be able to stay grounded and calm and conscious and peaceful and all the things that we all long to feel.
I think that's really important because I feel like, we get triggered, that's kind of my word. We get triggered a lot, right? You could be having this amazing and everything is going absolutely perfect, stress-free day, and then something can trigger you and it could totally change in a moment. And I feel that awareness and recognizing those triggers, is kind of get you back on track a lot faster, right? A lot faster. But you mentioned a second ago about how in your methodology you have 3 steps. Could you share a little bit about each of those steps?
Yeah, I'll back up even one more. My equation of the success of the transformation that occurs with this work is that it's this really simple formula that I heard from somebody, it's not mine. Awareness plus action equals transformation. So many philosophies are oriented towards awareness, mindfulness, meditation. They're fabulous. But a therapy, right? I'm a licensed therapist. Like, you become aware of your pattern, you become aware of your pattern. But what was missing for me was so then what? What do we do about it? And sometimes there are things that just talk about action without awareness. So the awareness part is the recognition of I call it the feel good scale, where you're at on your stress level. And so I have this scale that is the shape of a triangle, and it's red, yellow, green. So we call it red zone, yellow zone, green zone. When you're in the red zone, you're in the stress response. When you're in the green zone, you're in the thrive response. Also the relaxation, we call it's the relaxation response physiologically. So first you learn to identify through various signals, physiological, emotional, mental, relational. Where am I at on this scale? If we're red or yellow, where we become dangerous, we can be destructive to ourselves and others, because in the stress response, right, we lose control over choice. We then have the 3 steps which go with that symbology of the traffic light. First step is stop. Don't believe anything you think, feel, or want to do. And that's the first step. So traffic light, right, think red. Second step is yellow, think yellow, slow down and breathe. And the second step starts recalibrating your nervous system that's been hijacked by that trigger. And it's the fastest scientifically proven way to let our bodies know we're not in danger. And then the third step, think go, is we go towards what I call a feel-good habit. And a feel-good habit is a habit that makes you feel good sustainably, and contrast that to what I call a false good habit. Think false gods, right? That promise you the world, and then you end up hurting yourself or others. A false good habit is like binging or drinking too much wine, or yelling at your partner because for 2 minutes you feel better when you do the false good habit, but then it brings you right back into the stress response. A feel good habit is one that actually keeps you and anchors you into that green zone, so that over time, not only are you being helped in the moment with these 3 steps, you are literally changing the wiring of your brain and eventually becoming a person that lives in the green zone sustainably, which there's not that many people out there that live in the green zone sustainably.
I
I
love
think that
that. And I
makes
love what
sense.
you said. I love what, excuse me, I love what you
Okay.
said about don't believe what you're thinking right then. Because I had to have a really good talk with my grandson whom I'm raising. His thoughts were going in this direction that was just being destructive in a way to himself and the family. And I said, stop believing what you're thinking. And I love that you said that, because I have to tell myself all the time, it's not always true what I'm telling myself. And I also love what you said in your blog. You said emotions are energy in motion, and that they're not real and they can just take over our body. They're a form of energy.
Yeah, let me say this about don't why I say so strongly. Why the first step is don't believe your thoughts, your emotions, or your what you want to do. Right? Send that email before when you're in the red zone. You don't want to, have a difficult conversation in the red zone. When we are in the stress response, since this blew me away, I started doing research because of my own burnout, of the science of what happens to us. There are 2 primary things that happen in the stress response. One is our frontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that's responsible for decision making and planning and conscious rational thinking, gets kidnapped. Because if we are in danger, we don't want to be sitting around going, you know what? Should I run away from this animal coming at me? Or maybe I'll sit around. We want to act now, think later. So the frontal cortex gets kidnapped in the stress response. The other thing that happens is we can only see the other as the enemy, right? Our bodies are thinking we're in danger. So your husband, your colleague, your boss, your friend, if you're a kid, literally are experienced as dangerous, as the enemy. And this is why we become who we become in the red zone. What I always say, it's not your fault. who you become in the red zone, but it is your responsibility to recognize it and then do the 3 steps to get out of it. And I love that because all the work I do is non-shame based. Like one of my greatest passions in my life is to remove shame from some of the darker parts of us or more impulsive parts of us. And so this work teaches you, yeah, it's not your fault. Everybody becomes the same in the red zone. Wars come from the red zone, like violence comes from the red zone. But you can learn to recognize when it's starting to happen in you and to practice the 3 steps to get out of it.
I love that. So you said a couple things I really want to touch on. So one of the things is you're talking about action, right? Which I really love because as somebody who is in marketing and I really teach marketing strategy, I say that too. You can have all the strategies in the world, right? But if you don't take any action on them or implement anything, it's really not going to get you any closer to your goals, right? But then the other thing that you said that I really liked is when you're thinking about those zones, right? And you think about your triggers, one of the things that I have become aware of for myself is I know what some of my triggers are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware. So for me, it's always been, which kind of I feel is like what you're talking about, where you're leading us to go, which is being proactive versus reactive, right? And so for me, because I know what some of my triggers are, I think there was a time before I really learned this that I used to feel wrongly. I
Mm.
used to feel like if you know what one of my triggers are and you do it, well, then it's not my fault that now I say whatever I'm going to say or do whatever I'm going to do because you knew that was a trigger for me and you did it. But now I realize that I am responsible, right? I am responsible. And so now I have, put into place, what are the being proactive, what are the things that I'm going to do, right? I mean, I'm going to say that if there's any woman out there, anybody that's listening to this that's ever been divorced or, ever had any type of thing, like, believe me, we all have triggers, right? Some people call it baggage, right? Whatever it is, but we do have some type of triggers, but recognizing them and being aware of them so that you can be proactive is something I really like because to think that you're never going to be triggered isn't really very realistic. But having a plan on how you're going to handle them, I think, is so freeing, really, right? But then that doesn't really work if you don't have awareness either. So I think that really what you just said is so important. And then it kind of allows you to give yourself grace too, which I think is also
Exactly.
really important.
I love that. And by the way, I've been through a divorce, and my partner and I, Brian, we're back together because of this work. So we
Wow.
actually divorced in 2014. And so there were a couple reasons for it. One of the reasons was burnout. I was seeing 8 clients a day, 5 days a week in my private practice, and I was always really good with my kids because I was raised in an abusive environment. So I knew as a mother I would always being a loving, present mother, and I was always loving and present to my clients. But guess who got the brunt of my burnout, which is often true for women, was my husband. And so we actually got divorced and got back together. Yeah, the shame piece, like what I think the very core of my work that I think I discovered this a few months ago. I think when I was very young, the adults in my life, there was abuse and neglect, were so not responsible with who they were and their emotions and how they treated their children that I think early on I decided somewhere deep inside that I was going to create work that helped people become self-responsible. And I didn't even realize that till a few months ago, years after I created this methodology, it was like, that's my greatest passion. And it's not teaching them to become self-responsible through guilting them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't believe you yelled, or I can't believe you binged, or I can't believe whatever it is. But by saying, yeah, of course you yelled, you binged, you whatever it is. And there's a different way for you to behave. And let me give you the power back so that you can choose how you want to show up as a human being and be self-responsible. It's funny, I haven't shared this publicly yet, but this is I didn't realize it's like actually, I think my life's mission to help people become self-responsible.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that the first time on our show. Patty, I loved what you said about sometimes we put our boundaries in the hands of other people. Okay, this is my trigger, and you make them responsible. Well, usually the people are boundary stompers anyway, and that's why you kind of have to set them, and you're putting it in their hands. So what I teach is that you are in charge of your own boundaries, or whatever you want to call them, and you make sure that they're met, not the other person, because that's the expectations that get stomped, and then we do yell.
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's important to do that because we are responsible. We do need to be responsible. But I think that that's like also being responsible to self as well, because I know that for me, if something triggered and I say I binged on a whole bag of potato chips or half a bag of cookies or whatever, right? Whatever that may be, like I could really beat myself up for that. And then that would send me spiraling, right? I've had to learn to give myself grace and say, oh, well, I only ate 3 cookies. So I'm going to be like happy that I was able to stop at 3 and I didn't eat the whole bag, right? You know what I mean? Or celebrate when I feel triggered and I react in a positive way, then I like to celebrate that, because I just feel like, oh, I did so good. And I don't know if anybody does this, and I think this is so funny, but I actually talk to myself. Now, I don't know if anybody out there is going to admit that they talk to themselves too.
Yes, I do.
But I do. But when I do, for some reason, I speak in my full name. So whenever I do something, I will be by myself and I'll be like, Patty Farmer, what were you thinking? Or like, Patty Farmer. But for some reason, I always use my full name. It must be thinking about my mom must have done that or something. But and when I catch myself saying my full name, it's like, what was that? Right. But it always happens for me when I say, Patty Farmer, are you sure you want to do that? Patty Farmer, whatever. And I catch myself. And that's when I absolutely know to stop. And, oh, I just said my full name. Something's going on there. Whatever. It's almost like it's funny though. Like I laugh at myself and it's like, when I share that with people, they're like, really? You talk to yourself and you call yourself Patty Farmer? I'm like, I know, but I do.
I love it.
I love it too.
It's one of those things. Okay, so as an expert, right? You're our stress expert right now. Could you share, like, I love that you went through that, but can we go a little bit deeper? So as the expert, can you share, maybe 2 or 3 ways that would really describe the value that you bring to the marketplace, right? Here we are. We do have entrepreneurs. They go through things all day long. You could have a great call and then the next call not be so great. And then you could get a phone call and then you could find out that, the client that paid you, their check bounced. I mean, whatever. It could be anything, right? But what are 2 or 3 ways that you bring the value in your methodology so that our audience here could be like, oh, wow, those are some really good ones. I'm going to work on those.
Yeah, I think that what comes the most immediately to share is that so not only do I believe in the balance of action plus, awareness plus action, I also believe in immediate and foundational work. So what I love about the methodology is it is an in the moment tool. So I don't know if you know this, Tara Bennett Goleman, who's Daniel Goleman's wife, who wrote about emotional intelligence, she talked about the choice point. And the choice point is the moment between the impulse and the action, right? So when we have the impulse, I want to have the cookie, I want to yell, whatever it is. And that choice point is a 1/4 second long. And for adolescents, it's 1/64 of a second. So really, any good self-development work is about extending and expanding that choice point so that we can choose to go down the new habit versus the old one. So what I love about the methodology is that it can be used at that moment of choice point. And once I read about the choice point, that was in 2003. I became obsessed with it because I started looking around going, what do we have to support people at choice point? We have the rubber band, people like hurt themselves with the rubber band. And then if you read a self-development book at 10 o'clock, you can get really inspired about what they tell you. But what are you going to do in that moment you're about to eat that bag of chips? So I became obsessed with researching that. And so the methodology, it's like literally recognize I'm in, stop, slow down, breathe, do the feel good habit. That stops me in that moment. All right. And then the methodology also teaches us to practice that recognition throughout the day. The app just got completed a few months ago, ask you to check in a few times a day. And if you're in red or yellow, to come back to green. So it's not just in the moment, but it's also throughout your day. Because if you can track yourself on that scale, and every time you start inching a little bit towards yellow or red, catch yourself, you're going to be less likely when it's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, when your resources are depleted because you're tired and you finally feel safe because you're at home and you can yell at your kids. You're not going to do that because you will have managed yourself throughout the day. So the methodology, so work with yourself in the moment, and then also work with yourself throughout the day. And that's the killer. I don't know if the killer combo is the right word, but
the formula. That's the secret formula.
It's like the secret formula. And literally, I used to live at if you think of the scale 1 to 10, and 1 is all the way red, like you're blowing up, and 10 is all the way green. We all have a baseline level that we live at. I call it the homeostatic level. Most people that begin to work with me are at a 3 or 4, or between red and yellow. Most people hover right there. So it takes nothing, right, to switch us into red. Within 7 to 12 weeks, people shift into the green zone. And when that happens, you're going to be less likely for the trigger to be that destructive, right? It's just a win, 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 win the more you practice this work.
It almost sounds like a maintenance plan. Like that way, if you're here and now you're 7 or 8, even if something triggers you, you may only go up to 5 or 6 rather than going all the way up to 1 or 2. So that leads me to a question. So if you were practicing that, which I love that, right? Because that's how you make a habit. What are some questions other than asking yourself, checking yourself and saying, what color zone am I in right now? Whatever. Are there some self-awareness questions that we could check in with ourselves, that we could ask ourselves, that would help us to identify which one of those zones that we're in?
Yeah. So in my work, I have a chart, and there's a list of physiological signals like racing heart rate, constricted muscles, very specific physiological, very specific emotional signals, very specific mindset signals like ruminating thoughts, right? Anxiety, and then very specific relational signals. So I have signals for all the zones. And so you learn to identify, and these are science-based. This is not, out of the sky. So you learn to identify, oh, I have racing heart rate. Oh my God, I'm feeling my shoulders up in my neck. And oh, I really feel so frustrated right now. So you learn to recognize from this slew of signals, and then to practice the 3 steps. And it's interesting, Patty, because you talk about triggers. The amazing thing with this work, now remember, I'm a therapist. I spent 20 years in private practice understanding the why. Why do people become the way they are? The thing with this work that's so extraordinary, you don't even need to know the why. You don't have to, as long as you can, right? But it's not what's urgently necessary to bring yourself back to green. Because anyway, if you bring yourself back to green, you're going to have more space and more wisdom to be actually, what happened earlier? Why did I get so red zone? But in order to bring yourself to green, to change, to transform, you actually just have to recognize you're in it and practice the 3 steps. Because I think why is fabulous, important, necessary, but not always. And I think sometimes, especially in therapy, we can get stuck in the exploration of the why without actually changing. And I'm exaggerating this, but it's important.
Yes, you can get stuck on your why. And then when you get stuck on that, it could stop you from recognizing and taking the next step. And then that could cause stress all in itself.
Oh yeah, it's a big loop, a big thought loop.
Right.
Exactly.
It really could be. So Isabelle, what is the best testimonial you've ever received from a client?
Okay. It's funny. I'll tell you one.
I think you were a 10 right then.
That was such a good question. The good call. I took a breath, right? And I slowed down, and I felt such pleasure about your question. I know people don't ask that.
I could see that.
I'm going to say 2, but one specific. So the greatest testimonial I get, especially when I teach businesses, because my work now is expanding, and that's why we have the app to B2B, to businesses, is that every single person that ever does this work brings it to their families too, and then talks about how it's not just their relationships at work and their work that's changed, but that their home has changed. They'll teach it to their partners, they'll teach it to their children. So that's why I was never a corporate person, but that's why I'm so grateful for now expanding into B&B the last 3 years, because I'm actually realizing it has even more impact than B2C because people learned it at work and at home. But I love resistant people. I worked with eating disorders for 20 years. That was my practice. And every single eating disorder client that's ever walked into my office, I think except for 5, didn't want to be there. And I had this thing around turning around resistant people and having them get excited to change. And so we were working for this construction company, Wilmang, in the fall. We were bringing the work. And the head of construction was really kind of cranky about being there. And he's like, yeah, I don't know if this is going to work. It's just 7 weeks. How can this work? And he's like, well, I've got high blood pressure, so I'm going to use my Apple Watch and I'm going to track whether this thing works, like the resistant people. And I was like, oh, I hope that the Apple Watch will be able to track that. And after week 4, he came to us, we had a meeting, and he's like, I had the most stressful week of any construction projects when all the permits come due and this and that. And he said, that was the lowest blood pressure I have recorded in as long as I can remember. And at the end of the course, 7 weeks later, his blood pressure had gone down 20 points. So even though the work is highly psychologically transformational and relationally transformation, those are more qualitative, right? This is such a physiological, quantitative measurement of the power of the work that it's one that always touched, especially because he was resistant. It's like, yay! In spite of his resistance, the work worked.
That's a great testimony.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. So you've shared a lot of really great tips with us, but do you have a resource? I find that people who listen to our show, they just love resources, right? We all do. I know it's like my favorite place to go on somebody's website is if they have a resource tab or whatever. So I just really kind of love it. So, do you have a resource, or could be yours, could just be a resource that you really love, like a go-to resource, but do you have a resource that you could share with our audience?
Well, I want to be transparent right now because I realized that you talked about I have a gift for your participants that I sent to you, and I'm realizing that right now I don't remember the name of the resource. So I know you just opened it this morning, Patty. Do you remember the name of it?
Oh, yes, it's about the green and the thrive, right?
And changing
just
habits.
so that we will have it when you go live. So if you're listening to it right now, to the audience, we are live, and it is right in the description, and there's a link directly to it.
Yeah, and what I love about it is that helps people really understand the zones, and then helps people choose habits that are going to keep them in the green zone. So I was like, I don't remember the name of it, but that's probably my powerful one.
Yeah, you have a lot of resources. You have your meditations. You have retreats. You have corporate training for 7 to 9 weeks. There's just
I have the app now. The app is changing everything because it's allowing this work to be scalable, and it's literally allowing you to have at your fingertips the capacity to track yourself and then take action. It is just astounding how much that's changed the game.
Every time you say the word action, I get a little excited. I think my number is like
for action people. Remember,
I just love action. Yes, Teresa and I are both action. Yes, so I really do. So, what do you love about your business right now? I mean, is it what's going on in your business right now that you are like super excited about, that you just absolutely love, and what's next?
Yeah. So I just formed a company with this man who has built 3 different apps that are all meant to change the world. And the last app he built he was the CTO, the chief technology officer of this app. And he helped the company go from 5 million to 200 million. It was a conscious weight loss company. So it was really incredible. And when we met a year and a half ago, and I told him about the methodology, he was like, this is literally made for now. So he's brought his team that's been together 20 years and I'm the content one, right? So he's the product guy. I'm the content one. And we just formed in January a second company that's called Stress Reset. And we just completed the app a couple of months ago. And so now we are coming out into scaling and bringing this to businesses, hopefully all over the world. So, it's a very different, I was a solopreneur for a long time, for 20 years with my private practice. The last 5 years, I've been an entrepreneur with my B2C. I've created a course. I have an apprenticeship program. I've done 5 years of training people in this methodology, because when people learn it, then they want to be trained and use it, many coaches and therapists and even individuals. And so this is just different. Like, I'm the CEO of what might become a really big company. And so it's a completely different journey, and it's scary and it's exciting, and every member of the team is inspired to create impact and change the world, and for us to be embodiments of the green zone, and to eventually have a certification where companies can become green zone certified. And it means that they function with authentic relationships and healthy communication and well-being and all the things that so many of us value. So it's really, really, really exciting and scary.
And we can tell it in her voice, can't we, Teresa? I mean, I love it when I ask someone when you're excited. Yeah, you actually are. So I love that.
What did you say, Teresa?
I think you might be an action personality too.
I have spent so many years in awareness. I mean, I did years of therapy, years of meditation, that I did find that it was missing a component. And so it's really like merging the two feels really exciting to me. I don't want just to take action. That's also scary, right? We can take really distorted action. I think you've got to have the balance of the two. But I am an enthusiastic human being, for sure.
And I love that. And I think we can actually see it, hear it, and feel it. So I love it.
Thank you.
So, Isabelle, how can our audience connect with you? Like, what is your website and what is the social media platform you spend the most time on?
Yeah, thank you so much. So for if you're a consumer, an individual, go to the feelgoodlife.com. That you'll be able to find. I have a 12-week course in there. I have all my meditations in there. The meditations are probably one of the most important things that I do, because my meditations are meant to bring you to the green zone. So the feelgoodlife.com. And then if you're somebody like, oh my God, my company could really use this, or you're somebody who has a company, stressreset.co is the B2B place. And then really, I have so many groups on Facebook and on Instagram, and I just decided to simplify. So if you just go to Facebook and go to my personal page, Isabelle Tierney, I have decided to stop having 1,000 groups and just to stick to one. So just find me on Facebook. I am on Instagram, but I don't show up enough in it. The place that I'm my most authentic, empowered self is on Facebook. So hopefully that's not too outdated for some people. I know it is, but
no, it is just beautiful. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Teresa for our lightning round.
Oh my gosh, I love lightning rounds. We've all had some epic failures, and what we want to ask you is, what is one of your biggest failures, and what did you learn from it?
Oh. So the first thing that comes to mind, so in 2014, when Brian and I divorced, I decided to do this 9-month coaching program to do a one-woman show in New York. I did a one-woman show in New York. And I had to write the script, I had to perform. And when I performed it, I had a whole bunch of college friends come. And they were horrified, and they had a party for me that night, and I was like, I did it. And I remember showing up at the party, and not one person said a word about my performance. And I found out later is because a lot of them were it was really raw. It was about sexual abuse, and it was about bulimia. So it felt, for 2 weeks, I just went under. Like, I went down. I couldn't get out of bed. Like, it took a lot to get out of it. So it really wasn't a failure in terms of like, was it really, but it felt like I had put myself the most out there that I ever had. And then I went down the most that I've ever gone down. So that's the story that comes to mind, because it was experienced as a failure for me, even though now I look back on it, like, that was incredible. Yeah.
Yes. What did you
learn? What did I learn from it? don't listen to everybody's opinions all the time. Trust yourself and trust what you are guided to do, because not everybody will like or resonate or be ready for your truth.
Yes,
Bam.
that's a huge thing right there. Don't listen to everyone's opinions. It can really get you messed up. Okay, on a lighter note, tell us about a bucket list item that you haven't got to yet. What is that?
You know what's so funny? I'm so glad I didn't remember any of those questions. The thing that comes to mind, and I'm like, want to scream no, and I don't want to say it out loud, and I can't believe I'm saying it, is to jump out of an airplane. And you have to understand, I don't want to jump out of an airplane. Like I really, really don't. I have no, and yet that was the first thing that came. This morning, I
Wow.
did another podcast about fear. And I think that there's a part of me that gets really irritated when anything stops me because of fear. Like, I don't want fear to guide my life. And so I'm just really stunned right now that, like, I'm not going to tell my family. We're going to be quiet that I said this, because then my family will hound me to do this. But
I
it's
look
really
forward to
about,
seeing it on Facebook.
yeah, I'll let you know. I'll tag you when I do that.
Oh, well, it's been amazing, Isabelle. I'm going to turn it back over to Patty.
That was really some really good answers. So thank you so much, Isabel. I really appreciate you joining Teresa and I on today's episode. And I want to say thank you for really like sharing deep, right? You know, a lot of times, you know, for what you're doing, right? For what you're doing, not everybody would want to really go that deep on a
Mm.
podcast to let people know, but I really appreciate that you did. I feel like you really showed up and served, and I thank you so much for that. And I thank our audience for showing up for us every single week. I really appreciate you being here. And I appreciate you really like not just tuning in, but connecting with our guests. You know, I love seeing the conversations that happen and the comments that show up when we post the podcast. So I really love that. I encourage you to make sure that you connect with Teresa and I and connect with our guest,
Mm.
right? This is how you're going to get to know her better and how you're going to take action. So that is my action item that I want to say that I would love for you to do. Make sure that you check out again our sponsor, the Professional Women's Network of Monterey. We will see you again next week. Thank you so
Thank you
much. Bye bye.
so much. It was amazing to be on your show. Bye bye.